Up next, as we talk about the intuitive way and frequency, the power of personal vibration, Penny Pierce joins us next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Did you know that each of us has a personal vibration that communicates who we are to the world and helps shape our own reality? Penny Pierce is a gifted intuitive visionary and one of the pioneers in the intuition development movement. She's a very popular author, lecturer, counselor, and trainer, specializing in intuition development, skillful perception, dream work. She has worked since 1977 as a coach to business executives, coaches, psychologists, scientists, trainers, and those on a spiritual path. Tonight, our guest on Coast to Coast AM. Penny, welcome to Coast. How are you?
Hi, George. It's good to be with you.
You know, you have done a remarkable job in these two works, The Intuitive Way and Frequency as well. How did this happen? How did this journey for you begin?
Well, I started off as a corporate art director and a graphic designer early on in my career, and I think that kind of kept my intuition open. It let me, if you have to design a logo for someone, you have to feel who they are and what kind of things would symbolize what they want to represent. And so it was a good training because I grew up in the Midwest, and becoming a professional intuitive didn't exist back then, So it was a gradual process of working my way into it by following all my inner urges. And my inner urges were about mystery, finding out why things happened underneath the surface, bit by bit. So when I was in high school, even, I was reading about psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, and never thought I would be able to do it until I moved up to Northern California in my 20s and found out they had classes in developing clairvoyance, of all things.
It works.
And I studied it. And it turned out, since I'd been pretty visual anyway and was able to see in pictures, that my visualization skills were high, and I didn't realize it. And then I was surprised when I could, look at someone and get images, and then they turned out to be accurate or to actually describe something about the person's real life.
So many people have used intuition to get by on their day-to-day lives. And you say that intuition happens to be the most powerful survival skill that we have right now, so that we should be using it all the time. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, part of what I've been observing over all these years and is that life is accelerating, and I'm sure you talk about this every night with everybody just about, but that information is proliferating, the bodies are vibrating faster, there's information overload. It's almost too much to process with our analytical linear mind. So we're needing to be able to process things much more directly and much faster with just less time overall. And I always have called intuition direct knowing, where you don't have to have proof necessarily, but right in the moment, you get a yes or a no. You get a sense of what to do, and almost sometimes whole understanding of the nuances that surround an issue. So part of it is that I think we're accelerating right now so much into, I would call it life in the present moment.
Yeah.
That we need a new kind of perception that allows us to handle the amount of information that's available. And intuition is that way of perceiving. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't use logic and we don't use science.
Which you have to, I think.
Of course. But to me, that comes afterwards. It's the intuition is the first grasp of things. It's that first sense. And
But how many people don't realize that? They get these intuitive feelings. They're there, but they don't act on it.
No, they gloss over them.
Yeah, they do. And then they say, "Oh my, I knew this was going to happen, but I didn't do anything."
Yes. There are so many different ways that our minds will negate or gloss over or go, yes, but, and then, whatever comes after the but just negates the first part of it. And part of the intuition development process, of course, is really making an agreement with yourself to trust your first impressions. And I have this practice now that I do, which is I call it my inner perceiver. It's like that part of us inside that notices things.
Yes.
You know, you and I could walk down the street together, the same street, and my inner perceiver would notice probably a whole different sequence of things than yours might. And that would mean our realities would be different. And I notice what I notice, I figure, because I need to notice it.
Sure.
Because I'm trying to show myself something or teach myself something. So I've made an agreement with that inner part of my own awareness. Now, maybe that's the soul. I don't know. But I've made an agreement to listen to it and to talk to it. And so I ask myself continually throughout the day, well, why am I noticing this? Or what's the good reason in why this might be happening? And that way I get my guidance and my intuitive insight kind of regularly throughout the day. But it also makes me trust my insides.
See, I think I'm pretty intuitive, Penny, and I've worked at it to get there. But my oldest daughter is very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
She saw the 9/11 situation in her head weeks before it occurred. Didn't know what it was. She did not know what it was, but she saw a major city covered in ash. You know, we talked about volcanoes. Nobody ever thought about planes smashing into buildings.
Yes.
But she's very intuitive. Are women more intuitive than men?
Well, that's a common belief, but I think that what really is going on there is that women's brains are wired up a little differently than men's. You know, women have more fibers that connect the left and right sides of the brain. So the way they perceive tends to be sort of bilateral. They use both sides of the brain at the same time, which means that women have a hard time separating from their environment or compartmentalizing. Everything is connected and sort of unified. Whereas men are more unilateral. They use the left side, then they use the right side, and almost need to make a conscious decision to shift into intuition sometimes.
What's this saying about, you know, mom's intuition, for example?
Well, I think that's maybe even father's intuition when it comes to a child.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to be almost energetically merged with your own child, you know, at a whole body level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a slightly different sort of thing because it's almost like your DNA is overlapping, you know, and and the whole energy fields are merged. So you will tend to know almost empathically what's going on with your family members. You know, it's common even like when a sibling dies or a parent dies or they're getting ready to, that you'll start to get fidgety and you'll start to know something's going on, but you won't know what it is.
You know, and in some cases, you do know what it is.
Yes, sometimes.
What about children? Do they tend to be more intuitive than adults?
Well, you know, there is what they call these new indigo children, or the newest generations of young people, which I think they say started coming in around 1970. And from what I've heard metaphysically, a lot of these are soul groups that were incarnated, let's say, in the mental plane, rather than having had a lot of physical lifetimes or physical experience. They have a very strong connection into the mental realm. And so they have a speedier way of processing things. There's much less understanding about the slowness of the physical world and emotions. And so they have this sort of rapid, direct connection with information and telepathy, and often are working in groups. They need to connect with each other, just, you know, like gangs, and they all hang out together and do things together. And part of that is that in the mental plane, that's the way it is. It's a collective consciousness, and things are known all at once together. So I think that the kids have this special tendency to, let's say, be telepathic or be able to raise their consciousness into some of those higher realms. But then again, they also have more problem bringing that knowledge down through the body because they have more ADD and more environmental allergies and things that are disturbances in the physical body. And so I think part of the challenge with the kids